It's time. Derby County and friends going down in style.
Because I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Dunn, making the case as ever for brilliant Oxford United, and joining us, the king of data as ever, Jamie Rooney.
Yeah, good evening, Graham. I've crunched the numbers. It's official. I can say now, before we proceed, there's 100% chance there's going to be a relegation in tonight's episode.
Very good.
I don't know, my musical references aren't as good as yours. I try because I just want to be part of the cool gang. But I feel we've kind of gone from Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven to Ugly Kid Joe's Stairway to Hell. Is that a good reference? Have I just, got that right? I mean,
Ugly
I relied
Kid
on
Joe,
Google to help me with this.
It's quite something, isn't it? Yes, I think about that. So this is our sister episode to the fantastic Derby County Brian Clough team that we did last week. We kind of titled it Derby, Heaven and Hell. And Derby, we have had the Heaven with Brian Clough's title-winning side. And now it's time for the Hell, which is Derby County's record and still record lowest points ever recorded. But we're going to look at a few other things as part of that. We thought it was a bit too unfair to solely focus on Derby, so we've got plenty of others within there. But fresh from helping us out last week on the Derby Heaven, we welcome back for the Derby Hell, it's Phil Craig. Hi, Phil.
Hello, Graham, Jamie. Yeah, that was really enjoyable, wasn't it? Looking at Derby and getting the chance to look back and revisit the career of Brian Clough as well. And there were any number of great stories and just kind of the quirkiness of his relationship with a number of players as well as the coaches. It was fantastic.
Sadly, from what I can tell, having been up to Pride Park last year, I saw the Brian Clough and Peter Taylor statue. There's no Paul Jewell statue, as far as I can tell.
Maybe it's a Bradford. Maybe Bradford got the Paul Jewell statue.
Yeah, that would make more sense. So yes, this Derby side. Now we thought, obviously, it made sense to have you on, Phil, because you've just done Derby, the Heaven side. But I mean, if there was a side that had given Derby a run for their money in terms of poorish league seasons, I mean, Sunderland have clocked up a couple of efforts there, haven't they?
Yeah, some record-breaking efforts. There was a lot riding on the 2007 season, not just for Derby County, but also for Sunderland as well, who in the 2000s, after the really good period under Peter Reid, decided that was enough and we should go and absolutely have two complete stinkers of seasons. But we're not touching on that, though, are we?
It'd be rude not to.
So aware of the is it Schadenfreude? Is that the right? Is that the
Sounds
right
good.
use for this?
Yeah.
You must be happier going into this recording. We're doing this recording after the opening game of this season, where Sunderland are back in the Premiership, and obviously part of me had hoped that it would be scripted with a 5-0 home defeat that would have set you up for quite a nervous season to see how it goes. But actually, it all seems to have gone quite well.
First game, 3 points, 3-0. 1 point before Man City, I think, scored their fourth goal. We were top of the table, so we can hold on to that. But what was kind of quite interesting, and there's a little kind of pattern that forms across some of the games around, particularly for the Premier League and the teams that have really struggled. There are examples of teams that were promoted and did well to get promoted. Invest, just don't have the resources to invest, start off badly and it kind of goes worse. And there was a certain degree of trepidation going into this season that might be the case. But we seem to have learned our lesson a little bit and learned from other clubs that have done better.
Yes, there's definitely some proper investment there. And with this Derby side, I think when you look at why things go wrong, I mean, when sides have terrible seasons, there's usually something off the pitch which is driving and contributing that. And that's certainly a factor in the Derby story as well. But actually, I think this is probably a case of Derby being one of those sides that kind of gets caught out by being promoted a bit early and also being promoted late. Because they get promoted via the playoffs, they straight away, are arguably the least well-equipped side for promotion because they've kind of got promotion off the back of a great run, and they've got less time to do anything about it. And that definitely seems to be. So it is interesting. This Derby side they do spend a bit of money. I think they spend about 10 million or so. Robert Earnshaw, who I think was quite a decent striker, but he does seem to, when I look back on it, I kind of think he's one of those too good for the Championship but not good enough for the Premiership kind of David Nugent style strikers. That's probably a fair. Betting 3.5 million on him and 2.5, I think, on Kenny Miller, who seems to do quite well for Derby. And the signing that really seemed to have been the one that drew quite a lot of attention, retrospect, was signing Claude Davis for 3 million, a centre-back for Sheffield United, who Billy Davis had back when he was managing Preston and been really good for him there. But I don't believe the Derby fans remember Claude Davis in quite such glowing terms.
First of all, you've got to reset your expectations because, without sounding too old, £3 million, even in those days, was probably a fair amount of money, but it's kind of peanuts. But I think you were right. There was a plan in place, and most teams in the Championship have a 5-year plan, which involves being promoted at some point in their 5th year. Sunderland had a similar plan, and I think managed to get promoted 1 year earlier than was expected, so it was possible. But they did do well, I think, to get promoted. And the manager at the time, Billy Davis, I think, thought they had done well. They finished 3rd in the table, close to being promoted, just 2 points off Birmingham and 4 points off the First Division champions that year that were just happened to be Sunderland. But, there we go. They make it into the Premier League. As you say, again, there's another kind of fault line there, isn't there, around going up via the playoffs and somehow losing a vital 2 or 3 weeks, not being able to plan, but they successfully kind of go up and, they start on 0 points, don't they, but don't necessarily make a huge amount of progress after that.
When Billy Davis comes from Preston, I think he set out, came in 2006, and I think what alludes to what you were saying, Graham, I think the plan was to always get Derby in the Premier League, but within 3 years. It's a really interesting question. Have they peaked too early? Have they gone too soon? But I think there was some potential, because I think going into March, they were top of the Championship and looking like going up in the 2 automatic spots. But I think there was some debate around player bonuses, which created a bit of discourse, a bit of unrest in the dressing room, with the players getting it down to cold, hard cash. It's why they play the game, one of the reasons why they play the game. And I think after that kind of between 4 walls discussion, the form did drop off, but they were still in such a strong position. They were probably always going to make the playoffs. The question was, would they navigate the playoffs and win their place in the Premier League 2 seasons ahead of schedule?
They were a funny side. I mean, it does come out of the blue because the previous season, Derby finished, I think, 19th. They're only 2 places above relegation. They're sort of 7 or 8 points off it, so I don't think they're in any major risk going down. The previous season, under George Burley, they'd finished 4th. So, it's quite difficult to quite fathom. At this point, Derby are either good or terrible. There's sort of no middle ground with them. And going into the Premier League, they'd have been realistic. I think everyone's expectations or hopes or beliefs on it would have been realistic. But they draw their first game, I think, at home to Portsmouth, and then they lose 1 at Man City. It's all pretty respectable. At that point, I think there's no obvious sign that things are going to turn out the way they turn out. But it sort of quite quickly starts going pear-shaped.
Yeah, I think one of the common issues and problems, it happens fairly early, is when a team is promoted and quite early on in the season, they take a bit of a beating. I think in their 3rd game, they went to Tottenham and lost 4-0. And then in their 5th game, they went to Anfield and lost 6-0. And then shortly afterwards, actually, later in September, they lose 5-0 at Arsenal as well. So they've had 3 pretty big defeats in their first 7 or 8 games. I think that is a kind of common pattern with promoted teams. I've made a bit of a study over the years as a Sunderland supporter of why you lose in the Premier League. And I think that's one of the issues, getting big defeats, really bad defeats early on.
It's fascinating, actually, because you're right. After that Liverpool defeat, the ever publicity-shy Paddy Power payout on Derby getting relegated.
Yes.
But a team that we covered 2 weeks ago, it is true. A team we covered 2 weeks ago, Crystal Palace, of course, under Steve Coppell, in 1990, they lose 9-0 at Liverpool about this time of the season, newly promoted at the time. And they go and sign the first £1 million goalkeeper, Nigel Martin, and stay up relatively comfortably and get the FA Cup final. So it doesn't have to be hammering Anfield doesn't have to be the end of the story.
And they did respond really well after that hammering at Anfield. So having lost 6-0 the following, 2 weeks later. So they had a bit of a gap. They sat down and thought, okay, we've had a bad loss. And 2 weeks later on the 17th, their only win, wasn't it? They did beat Newcastle United.
Kenny Miller. I think we're going to get the opportunity to talk about styles of football in future episodes coming up, Graham, I hope. But also, this goal is so Route 1, I think we used to call it. Direct, I think is the more modern term. The keeper just launches it right through the middle. And Miller, and I can't remember the other Derby player, kind of 10 metres outside the penalty box. It kind of lands between them. And Miller it's a beautiful outside of the right foot shot that swerves in past the hapless Newcastle goalkeeper. It's Miller's first goal. And I mean, who would have thought on the 17th of September when you're reeling away after scoring that goal, that's the only game you're going to win in this football season, in this league football season. I mean, it's unfathomable to think that is going to be the case.
I mean, we had it when Oxford went down in the First Division back in '88. I mean, I think we didn't win after Christmas. It was something like 4 or 5 months of it. And you keep turning up and you keep thinking, statistically, this has to change at some point. And I mean, some weeks you're clearly out of your depth, but there are other weeks you're sort of throwing everything at it, and things just sort of don't break for you and don't fall for you. And it's interesting. I read a piece which Darren Moore was talking about his time there, and he sort of says, this Derby side were very unlucky. At the same time, there are lots of other reasons for why they went down. When you are having one of those seasons, it is incredible how across 30 odd games without winning, for something not to fall for you, it just seems unbelievable, really.
I mean, Darren Moore may be the optimist in this, but there were problems, I think, going into this because Derby were in the process of potentially being bought out. That was going on in the background. I think Billy Davis was unsure about where his immediate future lied. I think he had a fairly good relationship with Gatsby, but when Pearson took over, I think that the shape of that changed a little bit. And Billy Davis, I mean, he's quite a vocal individual, isn't he? He didn't seem shy with his media opportunities to lay the facts down that this Derby team were not good enough to compete in the Premier League and that there were players he probably wanted to bring in that didn't get brought in. And it kind of goes back to Phil's point about how you invest going into a Premier League, or do you invest going into a Premier League? And I think Sunderland and Birmingham, the two teams that went up from the Championship, they invested north of 20, 25 million each, I think, going into this Premier League. So they did, and for Sunderland that paid off, they stayed up. Birmingham, they did fall short, they got relegated with Derby. But Billy Davis was very vocal about this team is not good enough. And if you look at after the Portsmouth game where they drew 2-2, obviously this incredible win against Newcastle, but in 14 games after the Portsmouth 2-2, they only scored 3 goals. I mean, alarm bells are ringing, aren't they?
There's a point which they lose 12 out of 13 games. I mean, that really is, the stats just keep running. As you say, they just fail to score goals. I think Kenny Miller ends up as top scorer with 6 goals. Now, I can't really make too much fun of that because Oxford's top goal scorer last year, a joint goal scorer. Well, first of all, Mark Harris won Oxford's goal scorer last year with 6 goals at the Year Awards held the day before or the week before the last game of the season. And then actually our left back, Greg Lee, tied with him, but by scoring the last of it. Yeah, 2 top goal scorers to 6 goals. But, there's a real paucity of goals scored across that season.
And they've bought 2 strikers in Earnshaw and Miller. They've spent almost £6 million on these 2 strikers, and I think Miller's only got like 1 goal in the first 14 appearances. So he makes 15 appearances, maybe more. But also, I think going back to Darren Moore's optimism, wonderful optimism, I don't think it was shared because I think Dean Leacock, I think I've read quotes that, he was just petrified of each. He looked at the fixture list and I think he needed to change his underwear a couple of times.
Billy Davis is certainly of the opinion that things might have been different had he stayed in charge. I'm not sure there's too much evidence of that. But basically, this Derby side changes everything. The chairman, the chief executive, the owners, the manager, they've all changed by January. Davis is gone by November. It's obvious, as you say, I think that's connected to the chairman, John Gadsby, going, and Adam Pearson coming in from Hull, who had a different relationship. once Billy Davies is gone, if they think it's going to get any better under his successor, Paul Jewell, it doesn't, does it?
I mean, to be fair to Davies, I think they got 5 points in 14 games, and without giving away the ending, only get a further 6 in the rest of the season. So, they were in a better off position before he left than after he left, but it certainly doesn't improve after he's left and Paul Jewell takes over. I think he'd left Wigan at the end of the last season, citing either health concerns or problems in his marriage or something like that. He was going to take a break. Just to kind of illustrate the issue in terms of Billy Davies and how his job wasn't particularly secure, there was an agent who had approached Paul Jewell after he'd left Wigan, kind of asking about the Derby job. So it's kind of clear, even before he's fired, that Billy Davies is on thin ice. I mean, for Paul Jewell, I guess the only high spot really after losing game after game after game is on the 23rd of December, and without returning to it, his first point is in a 2-2 draw against Newcastle. So if nothing else, Derby do take 4 points off Newcastle in the season. So, thank you, Derby.
It is incredible that this team that are getting smashed on a regular basis, Newcastle failed to even beat them on one of the 2 occasions they play them. I don't know if Paul G was off for health reasons, or maybe he was just taking a sabbatical to make some films, because that comes out later in the season as well. But yeah, you're right. He doesn't turn things around. And it kind of opens the question, was it an impossible job? Because didn't Paul Gill have a reputation as being a bit of a miracle worker? I know we talked about this beforehand, but I can't remember. Paul Gill seemed a bit kind of lukewarm, hot property, lukewarm hot property. I don't know.
Well, he definitely seemed to have a reputation for getting underdogs places. So he got Bradford promoted. That was where he made his name. That got him the Sheffield Wednesday job, which ended pretty badly. And he was only there for 7-8 months. But he then got the Wigan job and got Wigan promoted and kept them in the Premier League. So I think as an appointment, it doesn't look a disaster. It would seem as though this was the right sort of job for him. I think that was in one of the articles I read where he said that multiple people subsequently, or even at the time, told him not to take the job. I think it's David Moyes or someone said, "Oh no, don't take that job. They're awful."
Yeah.
But it's just when you're having one of these seasons, you can't really believe it is going to go as badly wrong. And whilst the side and squad look short and feel short now, it's not demonstrably the worst side that's ever played in the Premiership as far as I mean, Swindon Town have been in there, for God's sake, and they got 30.
It's the Oxford-Swindon rivalry kind of coming through there. Looking at the evidence, they probably are the worst team. I think it's dangerous when a manager, however bad it is, says the players aren't up to it. It reminds me of when Sunderland were relegated from the Premier League under David Moyes, and after about 3 or 4 games, David Moyes said, "We're not good enough. It's going to be a real struggle." And everybody, even the supporters, started going, "God, it's going to be another one of those." And you wonder what the players were. So I think that was probably a mistake. Bringing in Paul Jewell, when you look at it, even with hindsight, does seem to make sense because of the success he had at Bradford, and particularly at Wigan. He had a success of taking, with limited resources, a team to the Premier League, but then keeping their position, albeit kind of close to the edge. But he has done it, and he must think, well, I've done it before. Why couldn't I do it again?
Yeah.
The big risk, the real danger, of course, is if you don't and you end up with 11 points. What does it do to your career afterwards?
Yes, and that does seem to have done it. Now, he sort of bets on wholesale change in January. It's a very busy January transfer window, though it's not obvious there's necessarily a lot of cash spent there. They do spend money on Robbie Savage and on Emmanuel Villa. Oh, it's not somebody I remember. But there's definitely a bringing in some wise old heads and senior pros at that stage. So Alan Stubbs comes in, Danny Mills comes in, Roy Carroll comes in.
Rangers, yeah. I think we've kind of classified them as players probably in the last few seasons of their career. So
yeah.
I kind of get, because it's not a massively experienced Derby team. Earnshaw and Miller's come in. Darren Moore's been there for a while, but he's not got a huge amount of experience, but he does bring in experience. And just going back to when Jewell takes over, I think it's quite an important point as well. They're only 4 points off safety. So, you can understand why he's taken the job and why he felt the time was right for him. And he's come from Wigan. Now, Wigan are in 19th. and they're on 8 points. Derby are on 6 points. So it's almost like a like for likeness in terms of where they are league position-wise, 2 points between them after these 14 games. You can understand your head turning towards Derby, because Derby, as we found out last week, they have history. They are seen as a bit of a medium-sized big club. They've got this wonderful pedigree where they've won the championship, 30, 40 years previously. So I kind of get it. But, I mean, it goes back to the point I think Phil made, or I can't remember if you made it, Graham. He doesn't really improve matters, even though he's bringing in these experienced players in the January transfer window.
Makes sense as well if you think about some of the players they brought in the transfer window. Alan Stubbs, for example, had experience of consistent losses from his time playing at Sunderland in 2005-06. So, there's some direct experience to kind of draw upon.
Definitely so. So the season doesn't end well, as we know. Derby are relegated by March. They don't win another game pretty incredibly. 6 draws under Paul Jewell's reign, and they end with a pretty incredible record. Played 38, won 1, drawn 8, and lost 29. Goal difference, goals 4, as you say, Jamie. 20 goals must be a record low, I would think. Goals against 89, a minus 69 goal difference. So pretty stranded.
It's not much fun, is it? Yeah.
Paul Jewell is in charge for 24 of those games, and his win ratio is 0%. He draws 4, loses the rest. A 0% win ratio in a 24-game Premier League is pretty special, and that's why we're talking about this team, I guess. It's something that you can't beat. You can't go lower than 0. Unless you're Donald Trump, who just invents stuff, then you can't really go lower than 0 when it comes to win ratio. His points per game ratio is 0.2. It's the poorest there's ever been, I think, in the Premier League. Terry Connors, I think it was, took over at Wolves as a caretaker role in 2012, but he didn't win a game either, but he still had a better points ratio than Paul Jewell at Derby. So, yeah, it's pretty poor. And then, Wigan, who were 2 points off Derby, finished 14th, super comfortable in the Premier League. Chris Hutchin comes in, doesn't do a good job. Steve Bruce replaces him and keeps Wigan in the Premier League. Maybe Derby should have hired Steve Bruce.
The thing that really struck me was that they were relegated on the 29th of March, which is, I think, the earliest ever in terms of a calendar date for a team to be relegated. And it was actually a game in which they drew as well. They got a 2-2 draw against Fulham on that day. So it's, ups and downs. But what really struck me after that, they lost every other game after that, of course, didn't they? But they were still getting over 30,000 for home games.
Yeah,
which is pretty impressive, really impressive. The other internal irony was on the last game of the season, they lost 4-0 at home, 33,000 again there to see it. All good. I doubt many of those were Reading supporters. They lost 4-0, but that didn't even help Reading. They got relegated as well, so that must have been a fun crowd, wasn't it?
And one of the reasons we were keen to talk about this team is whilst that record remains, because it's definitely going to go. I mean, Southampton obviously had a proper crack at it last year, and I think was it the penultimate game? They inched past and got to the magic 12 bigger. But I've been doing a bit of a Jamie Rooney statting here, unusually. It is odd because it's easy to see. So we're a bit used to teams being cut adrift in the Premier League now because the gulf is so high and is only going to continue in that way. The 2 seasons either side of Derby going down. So in 2007, Watford went down and they were bottom with 28 points. And the following season, West Brom went down with 32 points.
These are the bottom teams.
The bottom teams, yeah. So, it isn't sort of commonplace for teams to get that kind of total. And if you look at the first 10 years of the Premier League as a 20-team tournament, so if you exclude the first 3 years when there are 22 teams, the average points tally for the bottom side is 28.8, I think. And for over the last 10 years, the average for the bottom side is 20.7. And if you exclude Portsmouth, who've had a points deduction on top of theirs, there have been 7 clubs who failed to get past 20 points, and 4 of those are in the last decade. So it is definitely happening. It it is a thing that is.
It is a
Derby's
trend.
record is going.
Yeah, the gap between the team that wins the Premier League and the team that finishes bottom of the Premier League is growing. Season in the last 10, 15 years, that is now increased to almost, I think, 72, 73 points. I don't have the numbers in front of me. We've done this before, but it's in the low 70s, the gap between the team that finishes top and the team that finishes bottom. Historically, that was never that much. It was somewhere around about the 40s or 50 marks. Sometimes it was even closer to that. But the gap between first and fourth is growing as well. It's just becoming, the quality in the Premier League, in the English Premier League, is just becoming an extreme factor. With all of the great players now are coming into the league, and Sunderland have invested brilliantly, I think, in terms of this current Premier League season. And it would be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I think you have to. The Notts Forest, Phil, you mentioned it in the pre-recording. The Notts Forest investment when they came up was just basically just throwing cash, as many players as they possibly could, in order to find a squad that could keep them in the Premier League. And I think that has to be the trend. Or you accept the fact that, based on your stats, Graham, if you don't invest, you're going to go down, you get the parachute payments, and then you rebuild and you try to go back up. And we're seeing that now. Leeds, Burnley are two teams that have done the yo-yo effect literally in the last couple of seasons. And we'll probably see that again with Leicester this season.
Like you, I was quite interested in, obviously coming onto a podcast with Jamie, interested in the stats, but I looked at it slightly differently. And I wondered what was the biggest gap between the bottom team and the 17th place team. And there's one crumb of comfort for Derby County as a result of Southampton's performance last year. When Derby County were relegated in 2007-8. The gap between Derby and the 17th placed team, which was Fulham, who had 36 points, was 25. The gap from safety was 25 points. Southampton, although they got one more point than Derby, thanks to their final game of the season, they had 12 points. The gap between them and Tottenham on 38 points was 26. So now, no longer do Derby have the biggest gap from safety. So there's one crumb of comfort.
That is. It is interesting how things have sort of changed over that period as well, which again speaks to that same point. We mentioned this on the Crystal Palace pod. The year Palace went down, which is, I think, in the first year of the Premier League or the second year, Palace go down with 49 points.
Yeah.
Which I think is the highest ever to go down on. And I think Leicester maybe went down on 25 points last season.
It's harsh, isn't it?
Something.
This is the trend. This is
why we should celebrate this Derby side, because Derby were doing it before it was fashionable to get little or no points. So Derby get a lot of attention for this record, and understandably so, and we're giving it some attention too here. But they are far from the only side to have gone down in disastrous fashion, one form or another. And in the second half, we're going to take a look at one or two other teams from around the world who have produced something similar.
Do you have a team in mind that you'd like us to cover? Well, just don't keep it to yourself. Let us know. You can get in touch with us across the socials on X or Blue Sky. Graham is at Said and Dunn, and I am at Couch Pundito. That's on X and formerly known as Twitter, and also on Blue Sky. Remember, greatness isn't just the big and famous. We love a cult classic, and we love a good underdog story too. And also, watch this space. Some new channels coming your way.
Okay, so welcome back. We are talking... in the first half, we've been doing Derby's hell, but we didn't think it was fair just to focus on Derby County alone on this, with so many other teams that have had nightmare seasons. Second half is going to be about Howard Wilkinson's Sunderland.
Really?
Well, Phil, if you don't want to talk about Howard Wilkinson's Sunderland, why don't you, I don't know, cast your mind back and think, was there ever a team that arguably had a more spectacular record than Sunderland?
It was Mick McCarthy's Sunderland or Howard Wilkinson's Sunderland? There's a choice too, isn't it? Yeah. I was actually thinking about. They're within the top 10. There's two places for Sunderland teams. Before we turn back a few decades before that, there was Mick McCarthy's Sunderland team. I think there were similarities between that and we're kind of talking about the 2005-6 Sunderland team. There were similarities with Derby because, much like Derby, Sunderland had been promoted, and all of the Sunderland supporters wondered how they'd got promoted with the team they'd got. There wasn't any great investment. We bought a striker. Jonathan Stead was bought. He'd had some success at Blackburn, but there wasn't a strong track record there, and we fell like a stone. 15 points, which at the time was a record before Derby came along a few years later and did Sunderland a bit of a favour by getting 11 points. And there was also, obviously, there was the 2002 season as well, which was actually probably more painful, even though we ended up with 19 points, because that was the season that Peter Reid was fired. We appointed Howard Wilkinson, I think just because he hadn't managed for a few years, so why not just give him a chance? And yeah, we fell like a stone again. Howard Wilkinson didn't even see out the season. He was replaced by Mick McCarthy before the end of the season. And, you know, the Football Association allowed him to manage England after that, which is kind of quite peculiar. But yeah, so those were those two. But so I've got it out of the system now. Now Sunderland are back in the Premier League. I can talk about it. And it's not quite as painful as it was at the time.
So Mick McCarthy has his fingers on two records.
Yeah, you can't really blame him for the first one, though, really. He was only there for a relatively short period of time. But technically, like Alan Stubbs, yes, he has his fingers over two relegations, unfortunately.
Oh, what can you do? Well, we sent you looking further down, you know, as our history specialist, Phil. I know you like to look further afield. And there is an interesting team, isn't there? From Lancashire, I think, who back around the turn of the century, but not this last century.
We're further than that.
We're setting records then.
Yeah, we're going back to Darwin FC, and we are definitely going back. 1898 to 1899 season, and they're then English second division when it's probably worth just giving a bit of background to Darwin because they're not widely known. It's basically a small mill town in Lancashire, about 5 miles south of Blackburn. And actually, today they do have a team, but it plays in the North West Counties League, Division 1. So it's very much in the kind of the lower leagues. But actually, at the end of the 19th century, I would say Darwin and the team itself was a bit of a pioneer. As an amateur club, they were one of the first clubs from the north of England to achieve any success in the FA Cup. So they reached the quarter-finals of the FA Cup in 1879, where they lost to the Old Etonians in the second replay. And this caused a bit of a kind of controversy at the time because Darwin had signed two professional players, Fergus Suter and Jimmy Love, both from Partick in Scotland. But of course, the FA Cup at the time was exclusively an amateur competition. But those two players are believed to be the first professional players in English football. So they can look at that. That's one reason why they're a pioneer. Secondly, we've all got a bit of an interest in football TV and film, and we've, in the past commented on the kind of the great TV programs and movies, whether it's Sunderland Till I Die, We Are Netflix, or the Great Arsenal Stadium Mystery. But Darwin FC are also a subject of a 6-part television drama that was released in 2020, developed by that well-known football fan Julian Fellows, who might possibly be more famous for Gosford Park and Downton Abbey. This tells the story of, I'm not quite sure how accurate the story is, but it tells the story of their cup run and their defeat to the dastardly Old Etonians. It didn't put them off, though, because they reached the semi-finals again in 1881, losing to the Old Carthusians, who went to win the trophy, beating the Old Etonians 3-0. So it's a kind of very different game, I would say, at the end of the 19th century.
The English game. It's wonderful.
Yes.
I love that. I like to think all football films are documentaries. As my favourite one I like to reference every now and then, Escape to Victory, is my favourite documentary football film. So yeah, why isn't the English game? Let's just see it like a documentary. Let's believe everything that's in it.
We could push it, couldn't we? We should push it. It should be the new We Are Wrexham, really. If we could get a couple of Hollywood stars to kind of get involved and to kind of push it and star in it as well. So, as well as the Great Arsenal Stadium Mystery as well. We also talked about West Auckland many years ago as well, and there was a TV series about that as well, which is very good. Tim Healy and all the rest. There's a definite stream there. It's worth going into some detail about Darwin FC because it was a glorious but relatively short time in the Football League. So in 1891, they were elected to the Football League, but they finished bottom with just 11 points from 26 games. So it wasn't a great start for them, but that's not the season I'm going to focus on. In 1892, they were one of the first members of the new second division. So again, pioneers, first members of the second division. They finished third and then competed in a series of test matches before being promoted to the first division, which was an interesting kind of concept of the teams that were at the bottom of the upper division competing with teams from the lower division to see who would go through, which was interestingly tried in the first playoffs that were introduced, because Sunderland, interestingly, finished bottom of the second division in, was it 1996 or 1997, and played Gillingham, who were something like sixth off top of third division. And it didn't go well. We were relegated for the first time. So, yeah, this idea of test matches is old, but not necessarily kind of so old.
So, I mean, Darwin hold a few claims to fame. They're essentially the first team to get relegated. They're among the first teams to get promoted because they're part of the inaugural season. And then they get relegated again. So they're sort of the original yo-yo club as well, aren't they? They're kind of established as the Crystal Palace ahead of Crystal Palace.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right, Graham. They kind of basically bounce between the divisions, the first and the second division, from joining, which was 1891, all the way through to the main season, which I'm going to finally kind of get to along the way. So they were bouncing between the divisions until 1898-99. They found themselves in the second division again, and this is the tragedy. So they're not just pioneers, but this is a tragedy on the same level as King Lear. This was Darwin's last season in the Football League. They didn't have a very successful season. They finished bottom of the second division. They played 34 games. They won 2, drew 5, and lost 27. It's not good. They did, though, again, so to their credit, they did set 2 records. The most goals conceded by any team in a Football League season with 141, and also the number of consecutive defeats at the time, which was 18. Until, and here we go again, Sunderland lost 20 games in a row across 2 seasons in 2003. So, you know, they're up there with Sunderland in terms of setting records. 1898-99, not a good season. The season included a number of big defeats. So they lost 6-0 against Barnsley, Blackpool and Woolwich Arsenal. They lost 9-0 against Newton Heath. And we all know, I don't know what happened to Newton Heath, but yeah, they went on to maybe better things. That's it. That was the start of something great. 9-2 against Grimsby. And they also lost 10-0 against Loughborough. Who knew that Loughborough had a professional team at that point? Manchester City and Walsall. So they're still the only club to suffer 3 10-0 defeats in a single season. And it got worse. So the team were demoted from the Football League. This was the point at which you could get re-elected. You could, as I remember years ago, Hartlepool used to do this kind of every single season, or Darlington in the North East, they'd finish bottom of the fourth division but be re-elected to the Football League. And the team that's top of the conference is going, hey, hold on a minute, what about us? And obviously that's now much fairer. But the team were relegated from the Football League. They didn't get re-election. They went into voluntary liquidation at the end of the 1898-99 season and were forced to join the Lancashire League as a brand new club. So that's, I mean, it was bad for Derby, and they struggled in the years after being relegated, but it was particularly bad for Darwin FC.
The extraordinary thing is that Darwin produced those 3 10-0 defeats, yet that's still not their worst ever league defeat, is it? So Darwin, in their first season, lose 12-0 to West Bromwich Albion, which I believe remains a record of sorts.
Yeah.
So they were pioneering right from the start.
It's important just to kind of contextualise this a little bit, and Phil's already kind of referenced it and touched on it. Football is incredibly new at this point, yes. And there are teams popping up all over England that want to participate in this league. And professionalism is still something that's not seen as mandatory, but there are professional teams. And there are teams that just will not go professional. So it's a very different time I feel like you covered it. They're not professionals, Darwin. They're a bunch of amateurs. Yeah, I mean, and that's what the FA Cup, the beauty of the FA Cup was about. You know, it was born so every team could take part, regardless of your professional status or non-professional status. But yeah, it's a really, football is super young. It's super young, and I mean, the English Football Leagues have got absolutely decades to screw up the election and re-election process. This doesn't even come close to the debacle they come up with during the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Another detail of it is which talks to the point about how new football was, the league was at that point. So Dunn become the 14th club. I think the league is extended to 14 teams that year. And there's still a rule at that stage that says that no team can have the same colour kit. So again, they are pioneers. Their traditional kit would have been black and white, but Notts County had stolen that. So Dunn play in salmon pink.
Beautiful.
You know, in 1892, to be rocking a sort of Premier League third kit is quite something.
That is something. That's amazing. I mean, I always gravitate towards the pink kits, Palermo in particular. Yeah, that's wonderful. Salmon pink. Do you think that's got anything to do with the pink newspaper that used to come out in the afternoon on a Saturday that gave you all the football results? You know, various parts of the country. Definitely in the Midlands, definitely in the North. I don't know if the South had a pink newspaper, but the pink newspaper was the thing that you would stop off on your way home after the game to buy, so you could get the download of all of the day's fixtures before the days of radio even.
Yeah. How they manage that,
reliable
who knows?
Radio.
I do remember it from Birmingham in the Midlands there, so I remember it coming out then. But yeah, no, quite something.
I was going to use another example and I felt quite bad, but now I've decided I think it's important, as you know, Sunderland is featuring quite heavily tonight. Just to kind of give it context, when Darwin's got relegated with just this measly 9 points, was it, I think, Phil? This was the 11th Football League Championship. Sunderland had already been champions of England 3 times by this point. 3 of their 6 championships had been won at this point, and the last one was won in 1936. So just to give a little bit of context in terms of where we are in the world, in the football world.
And it's now coming full circle, isn't it? Because while Sunderland dominated the 1890s, in the 2020s, 2030s, again, there'll be a return to that similar level of domination once again.
They do say it always goes in 140-year cycles.
Yeah,
Indeed.
I've heard that a number of times.
Yeah. Most Sunderland supporters know that in the 1930s, when again we were back dominating, it was Adolf Hitler that basically put a stop to that. Without Hitler and the rise of fascism, who knows what would have happened?
It's a lot to answer for.
So the question is, as we go through, before we get into Schalke, are Darwin ranked worse than Derby, or Derby still on hot spot? Do they still stand their ground?
I think you still got to give it to Derby. I think for context, it's difficult to. I mean, I absolutely admire Darwin's
141
commitment.
goals against.
Yeah, I mean that's a dream team. 141 games. That's quite goals. That's quite something. And I absolutely, I love their commitment to clocking up records in their very short Football League career.
Yeah, they were amateurs. At least 9 of them were amateurs anyway.
As you mentioned there, Jamie, so we were looking at some other teams and stories from around the world, and this one isn't necessarily a worse performance. I just think the narrative of it I was drawn to, especially because of some of the familiar faces that emerged during this. So this is Schalke, and we're going bang up to date at this point. And this story begins in 2019, pre-COVID. And I mean, the first thing to say, Schalke, which I had no idea where Schalke was in Germany, and imagine my delight.
It's a massive football team.
Absolutely, I've always known Schalke, but I didn't know where in Germany it was. And so I was delighted that it's the brilliant name, Gelsenkirchen again,
Yes.
which is one of my favourite words to say. And one of the things that's striking about the Schalke story, unlike the Derby story, is that actually you're talking about a very established side. So Schalke, the year they go down, so the prime season is 2020-21, and that is their 30th consecutive year in the top league, in the Bundesliga. So this is like a they are a proper team with a proper heritage. They win the UEFA Cup in 97, I think it is, under Dutch manager Huub Stevens. And as recently as 2017, Schalke are finishing second in the Bundesliga. So this is a proper side with a proper record. Now, I touched on it a bit earlier. In this instance, there's a financial crisis, and this whole situation is made far worse by the pandemic, which interrupts the 2019-2020 season. But at this point, it is absolutely fascinating. So Germany, as you, Jamie, remembers, has a winter break, and they come back after the first game of the winter break in that 2019-2020 season, and they win again. And that means that after 18 games, they've lost only 3 times, happily sitting in the top reaches of the Bundesliga under David Wagner is managing the club at this point, so ex-Borussia Dortmund and Huddersfield Town manager. But after winning this game 2-0, I think on January the 16th, I think it is, in 2020, they fail to win any of their next 16 games. They lose 10 of those. The season is interrupted by COVID, so there's a couple of months off from that. Financial challenges are causing all sorts of challenges. But incredibly, Schalke finish 12th. Such was their start that they actually finish mid-table.
Do you know what I find fascinating about that? What I read as well, Graham, sorry to come in before you get into the 2021 season, is that, and this just really demonstrates the size of Schalke. They, through the COVID pandemic, obviously all football teams were finding it difficult, all businesses were finding it difficult, everyone was finding it difficult. It was a really strange period. Schalke put in a salary cap for their players, where the cap was £2 million per year, or there or thereabouts. I mean, that just tells you the size of this football team, the fact that they're capping their players, that they can only earn 2 million in a single football season. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. So Wagner stays in charge. If they're hoping for a change of fortunes the following season, they lose the first game of the season 8-0 to Bayern Munich. Not unusual to lose heavily to Bayern Munich, it has to be said, but that is enough. And Wagner is replaced after that game. He's replaced by a chap called Manuel Baum. Baum goes 10 games without winning either. At that point, that's 28 games in a row, or 27 games in a row, I think, without a win. They make another change. In comes back on a temporary basis, Huub Stevens, so the guy who won the UEFA Cup with them and had 2 other spells with them as manager. He comes in, sort of a desperate roll of the dice. He's in charge for 2 games on an interim basis. They failed to win either of those. So we are now getting, and it's worth saying, the heat is really picking up at this stage because the record number of games without a win in Germany is 31 and held by Tasmania Berlin. Exactly. So you're in desperate measures. You don't want the ignominy of carrying that record. Who do you turn to? Well, as any ex-Spurs fan or any Spurs fan would tell you, you surely go for the king of the underground himself, Christian Gross. So Christian Gross, he comes in December. The first game they lose. So we are now genuinely all set up for the big game, which is, can they avoid the 31 run record? Which, I mean, I'm just assuming from about October onwards, this was all they were playing for. And I think that just their eyes, all eyes were on the game against Hoffenheim. First game back in January, which amazingly, they don't just win, they win 4-0. So the run ends across the 2 seasons at 30 games without a win. Christian Gross does achieve it. That run is just shy of a year. So they are, I think it was January 16th and then January the 9th, something like that. There's 7 or 8 days within it. It doesn't get any better, really. Christian Gross fails to win another game. 9 games later, Christian Gross is out. They bring in a 5th manager, Dimitros Gramosis. I don't know if that's a correct pronunciation. Who did, in fairness, pick up a couple of wins in the back end of the season. And Schalke do end up with, a highly respectable, I think we'd say, 16 points. But yes, in terms of a season going wrong, this is right up there. And I like that story pretty much mostly because Christian Grothe is unlikely a walk-on part. Schalke actually bounced back. I think they get promoted the following season, but the financial problems are pretty deep-rooted and they have gone back down again. So continued challenges there.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken from that, Graham, the quiz question, which I'm kicking myself I haven't prepped on, but maybe for next week. Which football team has had the most managers in a single season? Because I think I counted 5 managers were responsible for Schalke during that season, which is some going.
It really is. It really is. And in fairness to them, I suppose Wagner goes after 1 or 2 games. Stevens only has a couple of games in, but you're not talking about a bunch of caretakers in there. They are all sort of full-time managers. So that 5 managers. I mean, even Watford don't get through that many.
Well, over 3 seasons they would, I'm sure. Actually, yeah, Watford's a good shout. They do seem to replace their manager as often as they replace their football boots. Yeah, it's more significance attached to this one because of the size of Schalke. I mean, Bayern Munich are by far and away the biggest team in German football, and they will be forevermore. But there are some big boys around Bayern Munich that do get involved and do spoil the Munich party every now and then. Dortmund being the obvious one. They're near rivals. Dortmund's near rivals. Schalke are also a massive team, and they also reached the European Champions League semi-finals around about, I think, probably 8-9 seasons prior to this particular season when they get relegated down to Bundesliga 2. But yeah, it's a real big deal. I mean, they're Gelsenkirchen, the stadium, I think it's like 1,000, 70,000. It's one of the massive ones. It really is, and it staged Champions League finals itself. This is a big deal. I mean, Derby are former league champions, but Schalke are a notch ahead. Oh, I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Schalke Derby. I mean,
similar, not similar in sort of size, I guess. But yes, so pretty spectacular. Now, Jamie, I'm assuming because you are wearing an Italian shirt that you have gone for an Italian side for your option.
That is a brilliant assumption, and also 100% incorrect. There are Italian sides. Notable mentions: Lecce had a pretty nightmare season. I think around about 2011, 2012. I can't remember which one it was. They finished bottom with a measly amount of points, and I think they only won 3 games. I think they had something like about 12 or 13 points, a little more than Derby. And another honourable mention to the 1950-51 season, a team called Lleida, I think it's pronounced, in Spain, in Catalonia. They had their one and only season in the Spanish top flight, where they finished bottom with, I think, 9 points, but they lost every single away game, and they managed to concede on average 0.6 goals in every single away game as well, which I think is something impressive. 134 goals completely conceded. So it's not the 141 of Darwin, but to lose every single game with the average concession of 6 goals is super impressive. But I haven't gone with that. I haven't gone for an Italian team. I've gone to Scotland, and I've gone to Angus. And there's a team of mostly amateurs, generally through their history, called Brecon City. And Brecon City in the 2016-17 season received promotion to the Championship. That's the second tier of the Scottish football pyramid. A massive achievement. It's only I think they're only their second time they ever got into the Championship. The first time they did get relegated, I think with 15 or 16 points. This is 3 points for a win scenario. So fledgling player manager, Darren Dodds is the Brecon City manager. Now they go up via the playoffs, and there's a little bit of doubt whether they're going to stay there, but they're thinking, well, maybe we'll scrape a few, and you never know. We could be knocking on the doors with the proper big boys and, trying to hold our own in the Championship. But they get off to a pretty poor start, and they don't really improve much from there. And to kind of give you the big reveal, they play 36 league games. They lose 32. They draw 4. They win absolutely no games. Now, this is professional football, and this has happened in the last 10 years. And this is the second tier of Scottish football. a football team for the first time ever in Scotland's 130 odd years of professional football, organised football, failed to win a single league game. I think that's a rival to our Derby County team.
It really is quite something, isn't it? And in fact, don't they rival? Is that right that they don't get any points at all away from home as well?
They do lose all of their away games as well. Yes. Yeah. They do get a win in the Scottish Cup, third round. They beat a brilliantly named team called Bucky Thistle, 3-2. And then they get the big draw against Celtic in the next round, where they lose 5-0. That seems quite creditable, I think. Lose 3 of their 4 matches in the League Cup. They also play in the Scottish Challenge Cup in August, and they lose that, and they lose that to Bucky Thistle. So the one team they actually have beaten in the cup has also beaten them in another cup. So they can't even boast that they were better than at least one team they played, because they've already beaten them. I think 0 wins is incredible. And we talked about Derby getting relegated in March. For Brecon City, it was the same. Come early, late March, sorry. They were down. They were relegated in bottom position in the Scottish Championship and looking a sorry sight. 4 points from a 36-game season is, it's a win ratio of 0%. We're clear on that. It's also a points ratio of less than 2, which is the Paul Jewell points. It's quite remarkable. I don't know if you're looking at the league table now. They do actually stand out like a sore thumb when you look at the league table. I won't spoil it for you, but if you look at 9th place Dumbarton, who also got relegated, bearing in mind Brecon City had 4 points, you can see how close they were to the next team that got... And Dumbarton were relegated. They were 17 points away from safety. So taking that into consideration, Brecon City, I can tell you, were 26 points away from Dumbarton. So absolutely chalk and cheese in terms of the quality in that league. A brilliant, brilliant achievement. And that's why we do this. We don't just want to talk about greatness in the context of things that are wonderful and brilliant. We also want to talk about greatness in terms of this is an incredible achievement. This is an incredible story. Much like Darwin, Schalke and Derby County. Brecon City, 36 games. 0 wins.
It truly is something, I have to say. You've got to feel a bit sorry for them, battling all the way through and finally winning a cup game and then drawing Celtic in the next round. That's really harsh, isn't it?
One big difference with Brecon is that they absolutely did the Dolly Parton. They stood by their man. David Dodds, fledgling manager. In fact, he's only ever been a manager of Brecon City. So he got the team as a player manager promoted. He was responsible for the 0 wins and relegation. He then was responsible for relegation again. And then he did decide football management probably wasn't for him. Now, I don't know if he did do that, but if you look at his wiki page, Brecon City, this 3-year spell is the only time he's been a football manager. And, when we compare that to Schalke, who had, 70, 80 managers in one season, Darwin, who wouldn't even had a football manager. The football manager concept was a fairly unknown thing back in the 1890s. Derby, as we know, they've got rid of Billy Davis. They brought in Paul Jewell. Paul Jewell's done a worse job than Billy Davis. So they've stuck by their brand, Brecon, but they do fall out of the Scottish Football League in 2021. And they haven't returned. They're in the Highlands League now. They haven't returned to Scottish League football. So they are unable at this moment to better the record that no team wants.
It is quite something. Brecon City definitely raising the bar there. So we should get to ranking. Well, what we're going to do, I think we'll give a ranking Derby, and then I think we should try and kind of build an accumulated worst side of history from the various constituent parts. A Frankenstein's monster, so to speak. But Derby County, I don't think it's going to take very long. We do have 5 categories of greatness, 4 of them at the top. I think this is a straight fight between blinkered greats or not necessarily great, but without them we wouldn't be where we are today. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out it's not always about remembering teams that have lifted trophies. It's also, teams that have set a benchmark that nobody really wants to match. And without them, we wouldn't have those benchmarks for teams to match. And what's incredible, and one thing I have to say before I think you know where I'm going, hats off to the football fans of these teams, because we mentioned it, Derby County keep following their team thick and thin. Brecon City still had 3,000-4,000 turning up. I don't know, does it become a game at some point? Do you actually think, well, actually, we don't want to win now because we want to go for that record? I don't know. Yeah, it's not a situation I can safely say I've ever experienced. Come close to it in the last 12 months. But yeah, I think Derby County, 0708 for me, is not great, but without them, we wouldn't have records like we've got right now.
If only we had someone on the podcast who had almost come close to experiencing this nightmare. Phil, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I feel a little bit sorry for Derby County in that they did well. Well, they did. We all know how difficult it is to kind of get out of the Championship or the second division and to make it into the Premier League. And, you know, you take your chances. You might not have access to the resources to be a great success, but you've made it there and you've competed, you know, to an extent. You've beaten Newcastle, for example. So, you know, they I think they tried their best, didn't they? They tried their best, and you just hope that there isn't the fallout that kind of follows. And I wonder whether Derby, to some extent, have ever properly kind of recovered from that season. It's kind of got worse for them, hasn't it? They've dropped down to the second division, took a while to get up again, and don't look close even at the moment to get up. I mean, other than the season I think they had where they lost in the playoffs. I think they've done that maybe once or twice. They haven't gone particularly close. So, you know, yeah, not a great season. It's a record, but well done for them for getting promoted.
Graham, before you come in, I forgot to mention, it's probably worth putting into the way. Derby County the following season did get to the League Cup semi-finals, where they lost out narrowly in the semi-finals to Manchester United. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. There would have been a pretty nice cup run that went with this particular team as well. And I think we've got lost on the points and we forgot about their glorious cup runs.
Glorious cup runs the following season. Yes, Derby County, absolutely. This side, Blink of Greats doesn't quite feel right for them, does it? I think we have to say Derby County. I think I can drop the not necessarily not great, but without them we wouldn't be where we are today. I think what this exercise has shown us is from all these teams, there is a touch of something, isn't there, you want to bring there? I mean, I think Brecon, there's a gold standard there to have gone a complete season without a win. That is something you can't really imagine being matched.
No, it's incredible. I don't think it has happened. I mean, I did research that coming into this and I couldn't find any other record in most of the top leagues around the world where a team has failed to win a single game, especially in a 36-game season as well, in a 30-plus game season. It's remarkable.
I think Derby are bringing the profile. I mean, they've done it at the highest seat at the table. I mean, that's probably a little unfair on the Bundesliga. They've done it in the English Premier League. That's probably the biggest stage they could do it in. Phil, where did Darwin come in on this?
I think the club itself, in a relatively short period of time, we used the word pioneers, and they were pioneers. They were setting records here, there, and everywhere. And I think when you shine so bright, and Darwin shined bright at times, there's inevitably going to be a downside to all of that. So, you know, they're a bit like the actors you can think of, the Oliver Reeds, you know, who lived and partied and tried things out and did things and were, you know. Like the one thing I didn't mention, I think they possibly were, it's not quite sure, one of the first teams to play under floodlights. So they packed a huge amount in a relatively short period of time.
I don't think they were just pioneers being the first team to play under floodlights. I think they might have been the pioneers for setting up what we now call the Whipping Boys with their 3 10-0 defeats. Yeah. Surely, Whipping Boys must go all the way back to Darwin FC.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, 141 goals conceded. That is pretty special. And I think, what does Schalke bring to the party? Well, of course, it's the managers, isn't it? And any story cannot be capped off better than when Christian Gross walks through the door. The man who did get them their first win and avoid that record. But I think that just tops that story. Phil, thanks so much for taking on the gauntlet. A brave task given Sunderland's challenging year ahead. Although I would stress at the point of recording, Sunderland have 3 points on the board, and neither me or Jamie's team has a point.
I'm currently second in the Premier League as it stands at the moment as well. So, if you invite me back, we might revisit that place in the Premier League and see where we are in a few months' time.
Jamie, thank you as ever.
Very welcome. Thank you, Phil. That was fun looking at the more terrible side of football. But it's not terrible, is it really? It's the whole thing. It's what makes it great.
Brian Clough to Christine Gross.
There you go. There's no other podcast in the world that gives you that segue.
Excellent. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll speak to you again next time.